Welcome to Chicago Autism Network's virtual parent workshop. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families find and afford effective autism therapy. Tonight, we are privileged to hear from Dr. Kelly Canavan on the basics of AAC. Dr. Canavan is a pediatric speech-language pathologist and head of the speech-language department at IS Landing. She recently received her doctorate in speech-language pathology from Northwestern University after defending her research on AAC. So we are very fortunate to have her with us tonight, and I'll turn the time over to Kelly.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yes, no, awesome. Thanks, Beth. So as Kimmy said, my name is Kelly Canavan. I did just receive my doctorate, and I'm super excited to be talking about this topic. This is a large passion of mine, and I really, throughout my doctorate work with Northwestern, wanted to figure out how to reach out to the parent community and provide more education within this area, because I think it's something that's really critical, but sometimes is often overlooked and has a lot of myths behind it as well. So hopefully we clear through those. So some of the objectives and what I hope that you walk away with are definitions of what speech and language and communication are. Without any of these, we would not be able to be doing AAC. I want you to know what AAC is and the different types that are available, why and how AAC is used. We're going to talk a little bit about the vocabulary and then the impact of speech generating devices on verbalizations. And so just as a brief disclosure, I am a full-time speech language pathologist for IS Landing, and there's no relevant financial interest, arrangement, or affiliation with the Chicago Autism Network that could be perceived as a real or apparent conflict of interest in the context of the subject of this presentation. And then there are families and there are clients that are participating within the video or within the PowerPoint that will be videos, and all of the families have provided their consent for the use for this presentation only. And so it's really nice of them to be able to do, because then it gives you guys an example of what the different types of AAC are. So a little bit about me. I am certified within early intervention. I'm also certified and licensed in the state of Illinois. I have been practicing for about 6+ years. And just recently, this past March, graduated with my doctorate and did my research on the systematic review on the impact of verbal speech of children who use speech generating devices. My specialty and what I really enjoy and am passionate about doing is helping children who are on the autism spectrum or have a hard time communicating and providing them with the resources that they might need, whether that be whatever type of AAC or collaborating with other disciplines to help them then be able to further communicate their needs. I am also a large proponent for fun. And so if you were a part of any of my last presentation, there was a lot of fun to be had and reminding people to get on the floor and really enjoy and play, because that is where language is grown. And so that is my favorite piece of advice for parents as well as for therapists that I'm mentoring is do not be afraid to have fun or be silly. There is nothing that is too silly for our kids. The other thing as well is that there are different aspects throughout the presentation. I like to have more of a hands-on approach. We will be doing some activities. I'll be asking some questions. And so feel free to just pop your answers in the chat. I will put that in there and I'll have the chat visible so that way I can respond to that in more of a real-time approach. So here's an example of that. So just briefly, kind of type in, what do you guys think of when you hear communication or someone asks you, what is communication? Don't be scared. There's no wrong answer. There we go. Expressing wants and needs. Nonverbal behavior. Okay, I like that one. Verbal and nonverbal language, thoughts and feelings. It's good. You guys are on the right track. Like it. Speech first, but know that communication goes way beyond verbal. Very nice. So then from that, what do you think of when you hear AAC? Okay. Okay. So it seems for the most part, you guys have a pretty clear understanding of what AAC is, a different way to communicate. Think of an iPad. That is definitely something that you see a lot of is people using iPads to be able to communicate. Okay, so I can't talk about AAC without talking a little bit about speech and language and what communication is. So what is speech? A lot of the times that can be a misconception that if my child is not speaking or if they have very limited verbal speech, then that means that they have very limited language. And that's actually something that's completely different, as speech is just a verbal means of being able to communicate. And it's the physical act of producing a voice, producing sound sequences, and then also looking at the rate of production or looking at the fluency of what you're verbally producing. And so then language. Language is defined as the socially shared code for representing concepts. And so the way that you have to have language is that two people have to be able to understand it. You cannot have language on its own. You have to be able to share the rules and what makes up language with somebody else, so then that way they're able to understand, as you have a sender and you also have a receiver when you're communicating. There's different categories with language. For the biggest ones and really kind of the most general ones are receptive language, which is the language that we're understanding and comprehending from within our environment, and then expressive language. How are we able to express these ideas, these requests, these wants? How are we able to share that with somebody? And so knowing that, and I have a feeling you guys might know the answer to this, is it possible to communicate with others using language without using speech? And so someone did mention it earlier too. Yep. Yep. You guys are good. So yes, the answer is yes. You can communicate primarily through gestures, or you can do facial expressions. ASHA defines communication as the active process of exchanging information and ideas. And this is where it requires both a sender and a receiver. You have to have somebody that's understanding what the signals are that you're sending off, and then someone to actually provide them. And so there's many different forms of communication. There is personalized movements, gestures, objects, vocalizations, verbalizations, the list goes on and on. Output from an AAC device is a big one, signs, pictures, and symbols as well. And so in order to, we have verbal speech, we have language, we now are building the blocks for communication. And so how does that continue to evolve? Well, language learning and use are determined by the interaction of biological and cognitive, psychosocial, and environmental factors, and language is always evolving. We see the language of our little ones and how they are communicating, and then we're watching how that language is growing. Our language changes. We did not have the language that we do in terms of teaching what emojis mean and using that within our text messages. We're now, I find myself teaching that from a social and pragmatic standpoint within therapy, and how should you be responding to this kind of emoji when really that was no part of our language 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so it is always evolving and constantly changing. And the effective use of language for communication requires an understanding of human interaction, meaning that you're understanding the nonverbal cues around you. You're motivated to communicate. This is a big one because we don't always necessarily know what our kids are motivated by in order to communicate. And then what are the socio-cultural roles? And so what should that communication look like between a parent and their child, or between a child and an elder? And all of these play into different factors of it. And so that's kind of a very brief description of what speech and language and communication are, because I feel that that's really important. It's not something that's necessarily always talked about. Typically during therapy sessions, we're talking about our therapy goals. We're talking about the gains of what we want for our kids. We talk about kind of all of the different factors that are happening, the strategies that we're using, but we don't always talk about the basics. And so that's what I hope that you guys walk away with from this course today. And so we're just going to talk about the basics of what AAC is. We're not tying it to any devices or anything such as that, just as an informative course of AAC. And so ASHA, which is our governing body, defines AAC as a method of functional and effective communication that involves supplementing or replacing natural speech or writing with aided symbols, which would be such as the picture communication symbols, or if anyone's familiar with PECS, that would be aided symbols, or unaided symbols. This would be manual signs, gestures, or finger spelling. What augmentative means is that if the natural speech is not meeting a child's communication needs. And so these strategies need to be augmented for them and for them to effectively communicate. And what the alternative piece of it means is that for a nonverbal child or a child who has limited verbal skills, these strategies are an alternate to their natural speech. They have natural speech, but it's not always there. And so therefore we need to give them another option in order for them to effectively communicate. So when to consider AAC? You might have heard this from another parent. You might have heard this from your therapist. It doesn't matter what discipline. I hope that everyone is talking about AAC. So when is this considered is a big thing. Sometimes you'll have people that are, thinking that their child might be too young, or they might be thinking that their child might be too old. They need a certain set of skills. And really, all it is when a child's speech output is not adequate to communicate everything that they want. And so the things that you want to consider and take into account are frustration levels, access to home and community environment, independence and developmentally appropriate daily activities, access to school curriculum, participation in classroom activities, ability to interact appropriately with family and peers. There are so many things that AAC can provide our kids with the support that they need. And it may be that at different stages in their life, they might need different types of AAC, or that AAC might need to be modified. And so they may have never needed it, but now all of a sudden they're in a school setting and they're interacting with all these unfamiliar adults. And okay, maybe now it's the time to introduce an AAC device because now it's something that would be more appropriate. So what is the purpose of AAC? The purpose of it primarily is that we want to create snug utterances, or we want the child to be able to communicate using this acronym of SNUG. And so we're thinking of spontaneous, novel. We want them to have utterances, and we want them to be able to generate it. We don't want them to have to rely on a communication partner to interpret what they need and then be able to fulfill that. And so communication should extend beyond just conveying the basic wants and needs. So beyond that requesting, it should be beyond just the pointing or getting their needs met, but actually communicating. What are the things that they like? What are the things that they see around? What are the things that they don't like? Or what are the things that they are needing maybe in this point in time? And so while requesting is one of the first milestones of expressive language development, and what you'll see primarily, because our kids are going to be motivated to request the items that we so meanly take away from them to try and increase their communication, it shouldn't be the only function that they are communicating with. And so AAC is helping with expanding that purpose and teaching that. And hopefully you'll be able to see that through some of the videos and examples from tonight. AAC users should also be able to produce words. They should be able to produce phrases. They should be able to produce sentences. They should be able to have this entire language system available to them for when they do need it. And they should be able to do that spontaneously. Again, they shouldn't have to rely on a communication partner or rely on somebody to be there to interpret their needs, so then they're able to communicate. So there's different types of AAC devices. A lot of people hear AAC and they think PECS, and they think speech generating devices, or like high-tech devices and devices on a computer. I was talking to my mom last night and she goes, oh yeah, like the device that Stephen Hawking uses. And I said, yes, but there's so much more to what AAC is. And there's so much more available now because of just the way that technology continues to grow. And so the first part of AAC devices would be our unaided systems, or our no-tech systems. And what that is primarily, that's sign language, that's gestures, body language, facial expressions. It's really anything that you have on your person, that you don't have to bring anything, you don't have to interpret anything from, a picture, from a device, this is something that you already have with you. And so the pros of this would be that your hands come wherever you go. And so you're able to start signing, and you don't have to go, oh, wait, I have to go get my talker. I have to make sure I have my communication board with me. You have your hands, and you have all the tools that you need. The cons of this would be that once the child achieves a more complex language level, ASL requires typically strength and some fine motor control. It also requires the other person to be able to interpret that ASL, and requires the family to be able to learn ASL. So then that way they're able to provide higher language models. You're not always going to come across people who are able to interpret these. And so therefore that can be sometimes a downfall. So then we go into our aided systems. These are systems that you may or may not have seen or may be familiar with. And so you would use some sort of tool or some sort of device with an aided system. And so there's 3 types of aided systems. The first type that you guys are going to see is a low-tech system. And so what that is, it's a piece of paper, or it's a cardboard, or it is visuals for a textbook. They are things that are not generating any kind of voice. It is something that is just providing a visual, and it's providing a visual support. And so therefore the child is then able to point to a picture, and somebody can then interpret what that need is, because they're able to see, oh, okay, they pointed to the picture of eat, they want something to eat. Now their child is getting their needs met. And so what it does, it emphasizes the social exchange of information from one person to another. The cons of this is that it doesn't emphasize communicating for a variety of functions. Some grammatical development can be difficult. The other part is that if there isn't somebody to interpret the need of the child right there, or to be able to vocalize it, you might miss it. And so that is something that I've noticed in some of my sessions, where if I haven't been directly with the child, or they've been across the room with their communication board and they point to something, I'm not getting that auditory feedback. I'm not knowing exactly what they might have pointed to, unless I can kind of get an eye over, and they might do it again. So that can sometimes be a little bit challenging, but this is typically a really great way to start, to see how is the child responding to something of a vocabulary system. How are they scanning, and are they getting that purpose behind it? And so this is a little girl. This is one of my clients. Obviously, this is during COVID, because you'll see the clear mask. We are implementing a low-tech communication board. And so the little back history on her, she does have signs. She is starting to vocalize more frequently. She does have, the engagement of going back and forth. She does have a diagnosis of Down syndrome. We don't necessarily have a lot of functional verbal speech, and a lot of what we have been communicating, we're waiting for a caregiver to model. And so thinking back to the snug we want those spontaneous and those novel utterances. We want them to be able to generate them independently. You're going to see me waiting a lot here. And so she has the board that was previously up. So she does have a NovaChat vocabulary word power board. But it is on a piece of paper. And so you'll see her pointing to that. You guys hear it?
Bamba peanut puffs. I like to eat.
Ooh, sorry, guys.
Eat Bamba peanut puffs. More! Yeah! You want more! More! I like to eat. Bamba peanut puffs. Yeah. Yum. More. You want more? making the M sound more. He's like, hi. Hi. Yum. More! You want more! More! Good girl!
So you'll see there that she had it a lot in the beginning. She was going to more. She's imitating the verbal output that I am providing for her. I'm not having her point to it and then say more and then go through all of these things. I'm immediately rewarding it for her, but I'm also modeling. I'm trying to have more of that verbal speech that's going along that comes with, saying the pictures that she's pointing to on the communication board. And so what you'll see then in the middle is that she's very used to someone interpreting her needs. She's grabbing towards the peanut puffs there. She wants to eat more of them. She's typically used to somebody going, oh, you want more. And then she would have gone back and just signed more, or she would have vocalized for more. But what I wanted to do there was have her be more independent, have her get that connection to go, oh, okay, every time I hit more, I don't have to have you prompt me. I know I did give her the visual prompt of like pointing to the board, but this was something that was a new skill where I'm waiting to see. This is a hard part for parents. This is a hard part for therapists. How long am I going to wait? So to see what are they, are they actually really wanting more of it? Or are they going to lose interest? Where is kind of going back and forth? And so let's see, go to the next one. There we go. And so that was low tech. So low tech, there is no speech. We are the ones that are providing that verbal output. Then mid-tech devices. So these are things that would be like your GoTalk or your Big Mac switches. What these are going to have is they're going to be pre-recorded messages. And so they're typically going to be fairly inexpensive. They're going to be portable. They're going to allow for you to customize any kind of communication. However, some of it might be limited. You might have ones that are one button. You might have 4 buttons. You're going to switch out the vocabulary depending on what the activity is that you're doing. And so you're having limited vocabulary options. You're not having access to an entire dynamic device that has about 8,000, can have 8,000 to 10,000 words available to it, but it is something that provides that verbal feedback right away. And so what you'll see here, let's see. So this is another one of my friends from a few years ago. He has a communication builder set up. So what we had done, we were not necessarily sure. He has some verbal communication. He had some sign. A lot of it was, really kind of inconsistent. And he was relying really heavily on a verbal model or a visual model. And we wanted to get more of that consistent communication to try and get rid of some of the negative behaviors or self-injurious behaviors. We weren't necessarily sure about motor planning. We weren't necessarily sure about visual skills and where that was. And then also that cause and effect. So we were trying to create some kind of connection between when I hit this, then I know that I'm getting rewarded with it, because that is what communication is you're providing a message and then there's an exchange. And so what you'll see here is this is a similar technique that is used within the PEC stage 1, where you're working on picture discrimination. And so you've learned that there's that exchange of the picture, but now you're learning that, oh, okay, all these pictures have different meanings. And so typically you would start off with a preferred item and a non-preferred item. The difference here is that PECS was not an effective model or an effective tool for this client because they needed that verbal output. They needed something to be a little bit more motivating. They needed someone else to hear what they were doing. The PECS picture was not something that was going to be a good option. So we're using the same strategy, but within a mid-tech device. And this is during snack time.
Yum.
Mommy, money.
What? Tell me.
You have to wait and see.
Food.
Food. Good job.
I think they're beef soup. You love them?
Yum.
Bubbles.
Uh-oh. Pop, pop, pop. Ow. Ow.
Bubbles. More. Bubbles.
So that's an example. That's the same device that we were using in the first video, which is also showing up in the second. It's now been changed to 8 pictures because we were still trying to increase our vocabulary, but also not sure exactly where to go next because of that consistency piece of it. And this was something that we had available. The other thing that you should notice is you'll see, again, he's verbally imitating. He's imitating after the device. He's imitating my verbalizations as well. And then the other thing is that the voice. So I am a female. I have a moderately high voice that can go pretty high. And this child's a male. It is a male voice that is on the pre-recorded message. And so this is one of my biggest things with any device, whether it be a mid-tech or a high-tech, anything that is having a voice output, that child needs to have some kind of ownership over it. And they need to have a voice that is matching who they are as a person. And so that is something that when I have a mid-tech device and I'm programming it for one of my male clients, I will go and I'll find a male therapist that see, okay, who do they know? Who are they familiar with? Who do they kind of associate with? So then that way I know that they're familiar with their voice, they like that voice, and so therefore that voice is going to be a part of them and that's going to have some ownership over it. With the high-tech devices, I will sit there with a child and see what voice are they reacting to. And it doesn't matter if you think, oh, they don't necessarily care about that, or that isn't something that they're paying attention to. It is. If you go through and you do the voice with your child, if you have a speech generation device, you'll see they'll look at you and they'll start to pay attention, or they'll start to notice, or they might smile from across the room if all of a sudden you've picked up on something that they like or sounds interesting to them. And so this brings us to our last one. So high-tech and speech generating devices. This is the highest of the high that you will get. There are different forms of it. So primarily, these are electronic devices that permit the storage and retrieval of messages, and many of which allow the use of speech output. So a lot of these will have speech output coming out of the actual speaker or coming out of a Bluetooth speaker. You will have devices that are classified as dedicated devices. And what that means is they're developed solely for the purpose of communication in AAC. And then you will have non-dedicated devices. And what those are, those might be computers, they might be iPads. They have been adapted for the use of as a communication tool, but they can also be used for other functions. And so speech generating devices can vary depending on what the needs are for. There are different representatives from each of the companies. If you are thinking about getting a speech generating device, definitely find a therapist who is equipped to go through and do an evaluation and do a trial process. It is something that can be covered by insurance. It is something that any therapist will help with any funding for a device. It is definitely a lengthy process, but it is something that is well worth it. And there's a reason why it's so lengthy. It's because you are choosing the language system that your child's going to respond to. And sometimes it might be, and the reason why it's so important to find somebody that is well versed in it is because you want to make sure that you're not choosing a system based off of your comfort level, because there are many different types of systems out there. And some of our kids might need more of a motor planning system, where that means that you're hiding most of the buttons and they are learning through actually learning the motor plan of where go is. And every single time I hit go, I know it's going to be in this one spot. Versus learning to be able to visually scan. They're getting all the words all at one time, and then they are learning which word means what. And sometimes it moves, sometimes another word is in that spot, but because they have that visual scanning ability, they don't have any motor impairment, then they're able to go through and have that visual planning. But both of those feel very different for us. This is a different language system for us to be using. And so that's why it's important to have somebody to be able to support you through that. And so what you'll see here is now this is a high-tech device. This is a NovaChat 8. He has word power 60 basic on there. And what we are doing, he is classified as a verbal communicator. However, we do use a speech generating device. And when we first started off, even though we were classified as a verbal communicator, we only had about 20 verbal words there. We only had about 20 verbal words there, and they were all based off of imitation or having our caregivers interpret what their message was. And so we got him a device. He started communicating, and he started verbally communicating much more. And so what we ended up doing was, instead of tossing the device to the side, we used the device to expand on his language. What you'll see within this task is we are working on describing words. So we're not working on him requesting, I'm getting ready to tickle him, which is why my hands are up like that. We're not working on him saying, I want tickle. We're working on him saying fast and faster, or slow and slower. And so you'll hear it. It's very faint, but you'll hear it through here. And notice that if you hear me speak, I am imitating what he says, because I'm just trying to increase that verbal modeling for him, but I am not modeling anything, or I'm not verbally prompting him.
Oh. Faster.
So you can see, so he starts off with saying fast. Our intelligibility is definitely impaired in some aspects of it, and as we talk more. And so the device is also there to support us. So we were saying faster, and then we went all the way to fastest, and then we told me to stop. And so there's some common misconceptions. So we've talked about the different devices. We've talked about why Aec is important. There are misconceptions, and we've got to talk about them, because we also have to break them and be able to not only educate ourselves, but then educate other people around us. And so the child must understand cause and effect, and the child must understand that a picture represents an object. Remember our friend that had started off with the two different pictures. He did not understand cause and effect. And so that's something that we taught him through the use of the device and being able to request for something that he wanted. He also started to understand that the pictures represented different objects. Once we started doing more of that picture descrim, you saw him hitting the sock. He knew that he didn't want a sock because it was very obviously snack time, and that is not something that you eat. And so therefore, then we started to build him up, and he started to realize that, okay, each of these pictures have something different. I was actually able to hit more bubbles and request for more bubbles to be had once there were more pictures available. So again, AAC teaches us cause and effect quite effectively. Adequate motor skills for AAC, like I talked about, there are different types of AAC and vocabulary systems available. There are key guards, there are touch guides, there are eye gaze, there's head pointers. There are so many different things available and out there for the use of AAC that adequate motor skills should not be something that is standing in the way. Child must understand enough language for AAC use. Again, we are using AAC to help them grow their communication, help them grow their language. This is their own language that they're learning. They're learning it just in a different way. And so it's our job to be able to model the use of this language, be able to incorporate AAC within our daily lives, so then that way they're able to then learn the language. A great example of this is that babies don't have great language before they're introduced to speech. We talk to newborns, we talk to babies. They aren't coming out of the womb understanding language. That is something that they're taught after exposure. And so then the child must be interested in communicating. This is definitely a tricky one, because a lot of the times you'll see parents, or I'll hear therapists say that they are not looking, they're not even interested in communicating with me, or they're not even paying attention. Okay, but let's find what they're motivated by. They might be motivated by turning the lights on and off in the room. And so you're in a dark room and you're turning the light on and you're turning the light off. They're going to start communicating because that's going to be something that gets their attention. Again, I said at the very beginning, it's great to be fun and to have fun. And that's something that is so important and crucial, especially when introducing an AAC device. So starting with an AAC, I'll kind of breeze through this a little bit faster because we'll also talk about it within the second presentation of when we're doing AAC and actually putting that into daily routines. But how we're typically introducing a device, at least at IS, is we are getting familiar with what the child system is. We're having the parents be familiar with it. We're doing coaching. We're sending videos home. We're modeling AAC and the use around the child. So you saw me every single time I have, except for with my kiddo that I was tickling, I have my hands on the device. I'm doing something where I'm modeling with it. We're using it. I'm showing them how to use it. And I'm not necessarily going, okay, push this button. Okay, do this. I'm just continuing to model and continuing to use the same thing, which is the same way that we would teach language to any of our kids. So you want to also encourage the child when he attempts to use it and provide differential reinforcement. So even though my one kiddo was hitting sock, okay, I'm giving you the sock every single time. I know it's not what you want. You might get frustrated. But what you're also going to do is learn that every single time consistently, when you hit that picture, that is what you're going to get. I'm not going to then kind of move it away and then give you food, because that would be teaching something different and that wouldn't be teaching what this language piece of it is. The device does need to be accessible at all times. So this is kind of one of my number one rules for any of my kids that get a device is, or when we're trialing a device, the first goal that I have is they have to be carrying the device around and they have to have some kind of ownership. It has to become a part of them. I don't care if they use the device. I don't care if they model on the device or if the therapist model on the device. Just make sure the child's transporting it. A lot of the times I'll see a device come into the clinic or I'll see a device go home and I'll go in and I'll observe. And what I'm doing is I'm watching the therapist or I'm watching the parent move the device with the child. That can't be the case, but we do it so naturally because we're like, you should be using this. So here you go. This is what you need. When in reality, we need to be prompting them like, hey, this thing doesn't just show up when you need to be communicating. You have to actually take ownership and know where everything is. Get it out of your backpack, bring it to the table, go and put it where it should be charged. And so that's a huge step when first introducing one, as well as setting up opportunities for the child to use the device. And so again, this is something that's customized to the family. It's customized depending on where everybody is within that process. That maybe we're just using it during snack time because that feels something safe, that's at the table. This is something that I know that I'm going to feel comfortable modeling because this is now a new system for me too. And so I'm going to feel comfortable modeling it. This is the only time I can do it. Great. We can build up a whole set of vocabulary just around sitting at the table. And so that's giving you something that's more concrete. Train other adults on how to operate and support the child's language and development through the use of AAC. A lot of the times I'll tell my parents, and a few of them are on here and may know, that I'll be like, take the device when they go to sleep, you can grab some wine, grab some food, or do something and just play around with it. Because that's how you're going to learn. That's how babies learn language, is they're babbling. That's how they learn how to make speech sounds. That's how our kids are going to learn on the device. They're going to babble on the device. They're going to hit a lot of buttons. They're going to drive you crazy, but it's the same thing that they would be doing verbally. And so we've got to make sure that we're also facilitating that. And then that's how we're going to learn how to use it, is that we are going to go through and have to learn where different things are on the device. Call also having silent periods of like, I'm not going to talk, I'm just going to use the device. That's something that's a little bit challenging, but it's a good challenge because it's pushing you outside of that comfort zone, and you're becoming familiar with it. Accessibility, talking about a little of this, is that designing a good experience for the child. And so making sure that the child carries the device around and that it's always within the child's visual field. If it's being charged or plugged in, then having them have some ownership over it. Maybe there's a picture where they have to match the device to the picture, and then that's its charging station at night. And then they go up and they go to bed, and then in the morning they know that that's there, and then it goes in their backpack. There's a lot more involved to it, and it sounds something that's so simple, but when we add another step to our already hectic daily routines, it's something that can be really challenging, but it's so crucial. So that's why it is the first step with generalizing any kind of AAC into the environment is, okay, how are we going to transport it or move it around before what's the vocabulary going to look like? Again, device should be charged, appropriate volume for the room. And so having the child have some ownership over that, talking to them the same way we would with our verbal kids, is that, okay, that's a loud voice. We're inside, it's quiet inside. We need to use a quieter voice, and teaching them what exactly this means. You want to have it be used only by the child. This shouldn't be a toy that's being used by everybody else. If you have a sibling that is interested in it, then teaching them like, okay, this is their voice. You have to ask them if it's okay. And so then teaching your child to either say yes or no, or what are the signs for yes and no? How do we know if it's okay? And if you're not necessarily sure, you can always print out a low-tech board for that other child to be using. And so then that way they're using something similar. If anything, they're modeling, which is great. And so that is something that then they can use, but the other child still has their voice. They still have that ownership. And then also making sure that it's locked within the app. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and tried to edit or just like checked on a device, and all of a sudden everything is everywhere and it's misprogrammed and it's just a little crazy. Kids can use technology better than we can for the most part now. And so it's really important to make sure that it's locked within the app. So then that way, it doesn't matter what kind of device that you have. So then that way they know that it's just the communication tool. So now we're going to talk a little bit about vocabulary, and we're going to do an activity. So I'm going to need you guys. I'm going to hide this. Get ready for the chat. Okay. So what we have here, we've talked about, let me get back to it. We have talked about accessibility. We've talked about what AAC is. We've talked about core boards and low-tech boards, high-tech boards. And so what I want to do now is I want to create a core board. And so we are going to create a board that we would use going to a restaurant. So what I want you guys to start doing is typing in some words that you would want to have on your core board to be using for AAC. We're going to a restaurant, it's after COVID and everything is great and we can go out again and be safe and socialize. And so let's see, I think there are 12 boxes, 16 boxes. And again, there's no wrong answers. Well, that's a great question. Single words, or can they be short phrases? Okay, for the purpose of this, they can be short phrases. Okay. Eat more, drink, need, napkin, spoon, fork, knife, hot. Okay, potty, I like that one. All done. Not sure what restaurant we're at. Okay, we'll just put food. We'll say that that goes to a general page. And then because we have hot, I'll also put cold. Okay, so we are going to a restaurant. I'm going to copy this. So excited. We've got our words. We assume we don't necessarily need to know what food or what restaurant because we can just kind of point to the menu. And so this is really exciting. Oh, wait, shoot. Let's see. First, we have to go to the bank. Who can use this core word to go and communicate to somebody at the bank? Be really hard. So the purpose of this is not it's not to trick, it's to teach about vocabulary. And so what it is that a lot of the times, and everybody is guilty of this. I'm going to go back into presentation mode. Everyone is guilty of creating special boards or special pages that are specialized to these specific things. And then we're teaching them and we're focusing all of our energy on teaching our kids this specific vocabulary that is fit for this specific event. So such as going to the restaurant, but we're not necessarily helping them then generalize it. So what's happening is we're teaching them language for that specific event, but we're not pulling it into something that is different, or we're not necessarily having access to those words. And so this is why with low-tech devices or with mid-tech devices, sometimes it can be tricky because the vocabulary isn't always available. We don't have that massive vocabulary that we do in a speech sharing device. However, I've seen the same thing in a speech sharing device where they are moving the words around. They're creating, like the very first core page is very specific to what I do when I am at McDonald's, but it's not necessarily helpful. And then there's a whole nother page that has a different set of vocabulary. Some of it overlaps, some of it doesn't, that is specific to home. And then another one that's specific to school. And then another one that, and so it keeps building all of these things on where it's not necessarily helping of like, okay, you know, we do have some good words on here of like, I want, drink, need. That's helping them be able to go, okay, when I'm at McDonald's, I can say, I need this. And when I'm at the bank, I can say, I need that. And then when I'm here, I can say, I need this. Because we're learning that need means so much more than just what it means at home or what it means at school. And so what a lot of the words that are typically used by toddlers are very much, you know, those general words, they're very much what we would consider core words. So you'll see all done, help, want, mind, more, stop, that, what, away, go, here, I, it, like, you, again. They're very general. They are used throughout every environment that they're in. And so this is something that we need to keep in mind when we are teaching AAC and when we're incorporating the AAC device, because core vocabulary. So this is something that you might have heard from your therapist, you might have heard from a teacher, or you may have just kind of heard it around, or you may have never heard it before. Core vocabulary, they are the most frequently used vocab words by children in a variety of contexts. And so these are verbs, adjectives, pronouns. These are all the things of like, you're going to go on a swing, we're going to go in the car, we're going to go down the street, we're going to go down the stairs. And so you're able to apply them and really start generalizing the use of it. For some reason, I think because a lot of the times the picture is really concrete, our kids are really concrete in the things that they're motivated by, we're using what we have considered more fringe vocabulary. What fringe vocabulary is, they're typically a high percentage of nouns, they're used in a specific context, and they're used in a small portion of communicative events and environments. And so fringe vocabulary would be chicken nuggets, Legos, bubbles, ball, car. Like they are things that are typically nouns. They're not able to really be used within that communication exchange, but they're really motivating for our kids. And so what our job is okay, maybe we have to do a combination of using the fringe vocabulary with the core vocabulary. The other thing to talk about is that a lot of the times when we see these devices, we see speech sharing devices or mid-tech or PECs, and there's a lot of pretty colors, right? And so I see the family, and typically they're like, I'm going to put this green and I'm going to make this yellow, and we're going to make it so that it makes sense. Well, there's a reason why there's a lot of colors that are set up. So what it goes off of is something called the Fitzgerald Key. And what that means is that each color is designated for a specific purpose. So you'll see here, yellow is typically the subject of your sentences. It's typically who, it's the people, it's the pronouns. You have green are your actions. What is going to be orange, and these are typically your nouns. They can also be white, the nouns, depending on what kind of device. That's the one I feel like fluctuates the most, because that can also be your fringe vocabulary. Where or your places are going to be in the purple. Your descriptors or your social words can kind of vary depending on the system that you're in. But what's important is to really understand, get to know the system that you're using, and then stick with it. Obviously, if you do have a child that has any kind of visual impairment, that's something that you're going to want to consult with your team and create what is going to be the best abstract, or what is going to be the best visual support for that child. Are they going to need something that's more high contrast? Are they going to not need as much color? What is that going to be looking like? And so that's why it's really beneficial to have that team involved within it. So what you'll see here, there we go. So what you'll see here is this is a client. This is before he actually got his speech sharing device. We just had a low-tech device. We had a low-tech binder. So again, this is a NovaChat. Well, it's not a NovaChat, but it's the word power vocabulary system, except it's in a binder. So this is a low-tech option. It's similar to what you had seen in the very first video, where she just had a piece of paper that had all of her vocabulary options. What this child has here is he actually has a flip book on the top of it that scrolls through preferred items. He's really motivated by the Legos. And so that's something you'll see here, is that he has his fringe vocabulary, which is up at the top and it's in white. And then you'll see the yellow, which is the subjects or your pronouns. So those are all your who's. And then the greens are going to be your actions. And so what you'll be able to see is how to incorporate or model the use of, just because they're motivated by fringe doesn't mean that you only have to be modeling fringe. What you'll also see here is that his intelligibility is really low. And so what we're working on is trying to make sure that he's going to be able to be understood by everybody involved.
Lego. Legos.
Legos.
I want Legos. Legos. More Legos. More Legos. Legos.
And so that was kind of a short piece of it. We'll go into more in the second part of how to then expand, and you'll see his verbalizations actually become clearer with the consistent model. But what I was doing is making sure that every time that he was selecting Legos, since that is something that somebody could interpret very easily and not necessarily interpret his verbal speech, anytime he hit it, even if his verbalizations weren't as accurate or not necessarily intelligible, he was getting rewarded with that Lego, and then I'm modeling with after what he's doing. So the age-old question, will an AAC device have a negative impact on my child's verbal speech? What do you guys think? Somebody said no. Yes, that's right. Yep, it will not. However, this is something that there is definitely a huge myth and a huge misconception. This is where the research gets really hard, is because it's very scattered. There are a lot of single case studies. There are a lot of different devices. There's a lot of different measurements. This was kind of I started off, I should say, for my doctorate with about 32,000 research articles that I was finding through, and I ended up with a grand number of 13 that actually looked at increasing the use of verbalizations in a child after a speech diaring device was introduced. So they're always looking at a lot of different things. However, what everything came back with was that verbal speech is actually increased after a speech diaring device is introduced. And only 5 of the studies that actually measured total verbalized speech, you can see that they all had some sort of increase. Most of them had about 150% to 320% increase in their verbalized words immediately following the intervention with a speech diaring device. So then, true or false, my child has some verbal speech, so they don't need an AAC device. False. You heard me mention a little bit earlier that some of the clients that you had seen were considered verbal communicators. Most of the participants that were in the 13 studies that I did analyze were considered to be primarily verbal or limited verbal. However, even though they were considered to be that way, does not mean that they were does not mean that they were effectively verbally communicating. Their caregivers said that they would have to interpret the message that they were doing, or they might have only had about 10 verbalizations or 10 verbal words or 20 verbal words, but they needed somebody to help interpret their message. And so that is something that then once they were able to have their message interpreted, then they were able to communicate more. And so what is really nice and awesome.
There was one study that did measure intelligibility.
Sorry,
they reported a growth.
There was one study that measured intelligibility from before. That was me speaking from a copied slide on my doctorate. But there was one study that measured intelligibility, and they actually grew their intelligibility of speech from 3% all the way up to 40% intelligibility, because what they're getting is they're getting a consistent model with a speech diaring device. So that's primarily what I was looking at, was the use of devices with that verbal output and how is that affecting a child's verbal speech. Because I think a lot of the times parents are really concerned that the device that does have verbal output is actually, we're no longer concerned about the child's verbal speech, or we're no longer looking at it, when really it's just the opposite. Because what the child is now getting is they're getting a consistent model. They don't have to rely on the model that's from the therapist or from mom or from somebody else and see there's all these different variations. Something that I like to tell some of my parents is, imagine if you were learning how to say the word water, okay? You hear water from your parents, and then you go to Philadelphia, which is where I'm originally from, and someone says water. Now, all of a sudden, do I have to say it this way, or do I have to say it a different way? Which way am I now modeling? How many times or how many variations am I saying it? And what they have is that from the device, they have their own way to say water. And that's something that they can copy, they can imitate, and they can hear consistently. They can babble on their device, and it's giving them that model. So why is all of this important? Why do I want to be providing you guys with this education? Why are you guys here? And hopefully you know and are taking away the information from it. It's because you guys are the biggest people to be involved in your kid's life that are using an AAC device. You're with them 4,200 minutes per week, whereas therapists, Beth, I saw that. Whereas therapists, we are only there 30 minutes a week, 60 minutes a week, depending on where you are. We might see them 5 times a week for an hour. It varies, but we are not with them consistently. We cannot be the only ones that are modeling, nor can the teacher be. it's you. And so you guys have to feel comfortable with using these devices, with using and modeling the devices within your everyday life, because that's how they're going to learn language. That's how anybody is learning language, is by being in that environment. So yeah, that is about all I have to say for tonight. In regards to AAC, I could go on, and I tried to stay, for the most part, on topic. I think that the next presentation and talking about AAC within daily routines and how to incorporate it will be something that will definitely be hands-on, and that I'm really excited for, because I feel like that's one of the hardest parts. But knowing the foundations and knowing all of that that goes into AAC is really important. And so